9 out of 10 battles are just not worth fighting. You got to identify that one battle that is worth fighting and fight it. There was a famous quote of Machiavelli on leadership more than anybody else. He says, in a leader, exasperation or irritation people don't mind. But they do mind if a leader is apprehensive or insecure. One thing that I'm lucky about in my job is it's not a desk job in an AC office. It gets me out there to go and meet people. So it's, by the way, an advice I give a lot of youngsters is don't have a job where the only relationship with is the laptop. And he told me that there's a book by Leo Tolstoy called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which I read and it really shook me. And then I bought like 20 copies of it and I'm giving it to all and sundry.
Welcome to another edition of the Knowledge Series. From me, Hrishi K, I have to say that the reason we didn't call it the CEO series or the Business Leader series is because we were thinking of a simple coinage of what we gain most from a series like this. And I said the one thing we gain is knowledge. So instead of giving it fancy acronyms, we stuck to the Knowledge series. I'm pleased to welcome somebody today who I actually discovered because of my voracious reading. I was going through a very strategic phase in my life where from pure editorial, I was asked to start looking at marketing, P&L, a host of other things, thrown into the deep end as it were. And almost like manna from heaven, for me, Hrishi K, and everybody who was working with me, this book called The CEO Factory hit the market. And I picked it up on a whim and I read it, and it's been perhaps 6 or almost 7 years since I first read that book. And I still carry those lessons with me very, very dearly and deeply. And I was just thinking that most business leaders, when they write books, they concentrate a lot on quote-unquote gyan. But this was a book written by a leader who understood that if I give real-life examples and I quote real-life instances, it might perhaps make an impact on young minds, and it certainly did for me. Please welcome the author of that book, and today, Managing Director and CEO of Godrej Consumer Products, the one and only Sudhir Sitapati. So wonderful of you to say yes to do this.
My pleasure, Hrishi. Thank you so much.
I'm going to start at what to me is an important point. I mean, before roles, designations, leadership titles, there's always a mindset that gets formed very, very early. What way of thinking did your early years in the workforce give you? One that still guides how you lead today.
In 2006, I had got a posting to London to be a brand manager on a brand called Persil, which is a big detergent brand in the UK. And I was cleaning up my predecessor's desk. I was getting there and throwing away a lot of the files, keep seeing what. And I saw one sheet of paper which was lying in the desk. And it had market share of Persil from 1964 to 2005. Somebody had drawn it and kept it there. And that really got me fascinated because we look at market share in business on a quarterly, monthly, annual, biannual, at most basis. But when you looked at market shares over 50 years, there was a staggering insight that came. The graph was a mountain. It went up and it came down. And then in that mountain, there were a lot of zags, a little bit, going a little bit up, a little bit down. Then I realized that all that I had worked, I was only working on those jags up and down, being happy when I went a little bit up, a little bit down, but not asking the question where the mountain is moving. And I spent the next 2 years, actually Persil is a very old brand, taking this market share from 1909. I had some time in my hand, and I drew 100-year share of Persil. And like this mountain was there in 50 years, there were two or three inflection points in a 100-year period. And I think the big lesson in that is we spend a lot of our energy and time on the small, on, the immediate. We get passionate about it, we fight, we feel happy. But it's the ones that change trajectory that matter in the long run. So you've got to ask the question at any point in time, is an action, a trajectory changing? Are you changing the trajectory of the mountain from climbing up to climbing down or the other way around? Or are you playing in the zags?
Very beautifully put. You've worked across geographies, India, Europe, Southeast Asia, Africa. When you're exposed to such diverse consumer realities, it's obvious that it does impact you. How did that reshape the way you think about innovation today?
One of the things I've kind of seen about innovations, and some of it has to even do with the earlier example, which is each one of those peaks and troughs was driven by an innovation. It's as important as that. I think basically a game-changing innovation changes life and everybody else is just... But the thing about it, and I spend a lot of time thinking about innovations, innovations don't arise everywhere. They arise in clusters. So there are ecosystems from which innovations arise. Ecosystems are usually close to a large market and close to some kind of educational system. So, when I go to some country and I find an enthusiastic brand manager saying, I want to innovate, the answer actually, the democratic answer is, go ahead and innovate. The real answer is you come to wherever the ecosystem of innovation is, and only then will you be able to innovate. So that's my kind of learning. Innovation is very patchy. It is not uniform. It's not, at least I don't feel like, people say it comes from everywhere. Anybody can innovate. Those are the nice things to stay. But actually it comes from concentration kind of bubbles.
Wow.
Silicon Valley is the most famous with a lot, but there are others like that.
Wow, that's a very interesting insight. Because then you're literally incubated, you're with like-minded people and you're all working together.
Yeah.
That
creativity is like that. Creativity forms in small, Bombay is a good center because of the film industry, etc. Or Bangalore is now becoming, I don't know if Bangalore is still, I don't know if it's called innovation center yet, but whatever, it has the makings of it.
Yeah.
So these ecosystems of creativity at the heart of it is a concentrated game.
Wow. There's often a skill leaders wish they had learned earlier. And, you look back and say, in retrospect, which capability did you develop later in your career that fundamentally changed the way you lead?
Picking battles, Hrishi. I think, when I was younger, you used to pick a lot of battles. And again, since you asked me what is fundamental, it goes back to that. If such few things in life make difference, you might as well figure out whether there's an odd that this thing that you're fighting over is really going to be one of those game changers, and only then pick that battle. 9 out of 10 battles are just not worth fighting. You got to identify that one battle that is worth fighting and fight it. So that is something that took me a long time to learn, that, give up, give in, negotiate, compromise. But pick that one big battle and don't compromise there.
But it's also wisdom that allows you to choose which battle to fight.
Yeah. That comes with a little bit of experience. A little bit of detachment. You've got to see yourself from a little bit of a distance, not be in the thick of things all points of time.
Yeah, detachment is a great word to hang on to. Some decisions fall badly, loudly, well, but they have an impact. Some teach or impact people very silently. Can you share a decision you got wrong, but one that gave you a very enduring insight despite that?
Many decisions I've got wrong, and some of the decisions are still in place, so I won't talk about more recent decisions. But I remember as a young brand manager, we were in a bitter price fight with Procter & Gamble as Hindustan Lever. And at that time, you're young, you're energetic, all kind of ties, but each question ties back to itself. And, they did a price drop, you provoked a price drop, it became an ego, and, you were just pricing your way, and the whole value in the market collapsed. And I think the big lesson there, is, it goes back to the same thing. You don't fight battles based on ego. Because an ego that, they're dropping, we're going to drop, now we're going to drop, they're going to drop, this is what volume share, this is what it is. So you're not in business to fight. A lot of us, we come from backgrounds, which is a lot of, unfortunately, it is still dominated by men. And unfortunately, men play too much sport. So their whole mindset is competitive.
Yeah.
So you're constantly thinking of business as competition. It's not competition. There's another way of looking at it, which is it's service. You're serving the consumer, you're trying to fulfill needs. So the moment you turn that So I would say that that big mistake that I made at that time was fighting a price battle, fighting with my ego. And it's happened many times in the past. Every time I look at mistakes that I have made, it is that the ego has come in the way of what is a sound business decision, which is to serve consumer. And I'm far from nirvana, so I still make those mistakes.
You know, one of the things that I still remember about the CEO factory is you talking about yourself being in IMA, and you thought you had done a great job on some projects, and your teacher comes and gives you a lesson about Mullah Nasruddin.
Yes.
Trying to find something under a light.
Yes.
Very early on, I mean, it's wonderful that you learn to talk very openly about your failings, which I think is a wonderful quality for a leader, and I hope to always try and emulate that. That's wonderful. Large organizations are built on processes, and people keep saying you have to get the systems in place, you have to get the process in place, and SOPs in place, and things like that. But from whatever I gather about you that I've read through your book, seen a few interviews, you seem to be of the mindset that sustained growth actually comes from people. At what point did you realize that leadership is more about shaping mindsets than managing these systems?
I don't know if there was a penny drop moment, and it's a cumulative experience on people. But again, a lot of changes. I used to give a lot of importance to whether somebody is bright or talented or very good. What I've now realized on people is there's only one quality that is required in people in your team, and that is integrity. And integrity is not like cheating on your expense statement. It is, being reflective, not being political, placing the team above yourself. So now what I do in teams that I work with, and you see, I have a lot of edges as a boss. And, there was a famous quote of Machiavelli on leadership more than anybody else. He says, in a leader, exasperation or irritation, people don't mind. But they do mind if a leader is apprehensive or insecure. This is what people don't like about leadership. So you don't have people around you who are apprehensive or insecure. They will keep sure. And that, because you see, if someone is not good at something and the person's honest, they realize they're not good at it, they find it from elsewhere. So I just feel to get top performing teams, you just need a bunch of honest guys, and then things take themselves. And more than systems, processes, that's the...
Lovely. In the media, we use Machiavellian a lot. So there you have it. In consumer businesses, innovation is often mistaken for just new launches. I hear so many business leaders saying that, it's a new innovation, but actually it's just a launch. How do you define meaningful innovation when serving millions across cultures, across contexts?
I mean, Hrishi, innovations have to solve unsolved problems in significantly better ways than they're getting solved today. If they don't do that, they're not an innovation. Going back to your very first question on that pivotal moment in my career, because there are just so many lessons from that personal chart. When I pulled back laundry category, which is a very large FMCG category, it's probably the largest FMCG category. In 100 years, how many innovations in 100 years do you think made a difference to the trajectory of the category and brand? So the answer was 4 innovations.
Wow.
In 100 years. Those innovations were fundamental. Addition of bleach in powder, creation of liquids, creation of low foaming products for front-loading washing machines, and creation of tablets. That is it. There were just 4 innovations in 100 years that made a difference to the graph. So, and it's not like, in terms of activity, because I was able to pull out activity in periods, the number of innovations or so-called innovations, every year there were 5 innovations. In other words, there were 500 innovations, give or take, in a 100-year period, and 4 of them made a difference. Each of those 4 were fundamentally different for consumers. So it's actually not hard to identify a great innovation when you see it. There's an innovation curve and diffusion and stuff like that. But very few innovations, but those innovations make all the difference. So it's one of those things where it's super important, but super rare.
Enough has been said about Gen Z, moving jobs, going through frequent role changes. I mean, I admire people like my father, who was with L&T for 4 decades. 2 decades with your previous organization. What does staying the course teach you that frequent role changes don't? Speaking to all the Gen Z there.
I mean, I kind of passionately believe that if you do a job, you should do it so that you make a difference. Whatever job you do. I'm not like, you got to make it. It takes a decade to make a difference in life. So even within levers, in 22 years, I effectively did, with an exception of 2-3 years in the middle. So of the 22 years, 20 years was split between 2 jobs. 10 years I worked on what was called Surf Excel or Dirt is Good, whether it was Persil or Surf Excel. A full decade I worked on it. And full decade I worked on Unilever's foods business, which was largely a tea business. So, and now I worked almost 5 years in Godrej, and here also I don't want, 5 years is not long enough. So people think 2 years is long, 3 years is long, 5 years is short. So if I want to finish my career, I'd like to do 3 or 4 at max 10-year stints. And the thing about making a difference, the funny thing about making a difference is nobody really knows the difference you made except yourself. And you know it both ways. You know when you've not made a difference, and you know you made a difference. So you can't, it's not a question of what others say and what others feel. And you can get attributed to success, not attributed to something that you've done. All that happens in life, but you know for yourself. And I do find that people whom I admire, people who really made a difference, spend that kind of decade on something.
Very well said. I'm going to remember that.
When you were telling me about the fact that you've been in radio for 30 years.
Yeah.
So
and almost 2 decades with the current player.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I could never put it as beautifully as you did. I'll just say I bat like Rahul Dravid.
Yeah.
Day after day you show up, But what you're saying is that it just makes so much sense when you say you need 10 years to make that difference, logically. When your decisions impact millions of lives daily, clarity becomes very, very critical. How do you simplify complexity without losing nuance?
I did my undergraduate in mathematics, and the only reason I did it in mathematics was the maths teachers didn't require you to attend class, which was the only one that they say you don't have to attend. So there was no attendance, and the whole department said I was in Xavier's in Bombay. So I didn't feel like attending a class, but I wasn't particularly good arithmetically. I was careless, but some parts of maths I liked. And the one thing in maths that I like the most, and the kind of essential lesson that I've learned in maths, is dependent variables and independent variables. What depends on what? And there are a lot of intermediate variables that people get confused, and that's where chaos happens. Whenever faced with a phenomenon, ask yourself the question, what's the dependent variable? What's the ultimate independent variable? The ultimate independent variable ends up being 2 or 3. No natural phenomenon, no human phenomenon. In causality, if you go all the way down and keep systematically going up, down, 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 will go to more than 2 variables. At most 3. So if you're able to plot that mentally, and I can't say I remember anything about maths, but this basic principle of dependent and independent variable is something that I found very useful in problem solving.
In my line of work in the media, I meet a lot of business leaders, and often what happens, I feel a little bit of jadedness creeps in, been there, done that. And the ones that I find really exciting are the ones that have, curiosity. But then it's human nature. As responsibilities grow, curiosity does shrink a little bit. It's the course of nature. How do you consciously protect curiosity at a stage when certainty is expected of you?
I think one of the things to protect curiosity is to constantly push yourself out of your comfort zone. Because all of us kind of get into a comfort zone, a routine of life. It's comfortable and you're constantly there. One of the good things about my job, and I've been only in one sector, which is FMCG, is it allows me to get out of office 2 days a week at least. So I'm meeting consumers, I'm in the market. I'm now blessed in this job that, a week or 10 days ago, I was in northern Nigeria. It's actually a pretty unsafe place. So with like these 4 big bodyguards, I was driving up Niger, just below the Sahara Desert, and then speaking to people about their daily life. So I think one thing that I'm lucky about in my job is It's not a desk job in an AC office. It gets me out there to go and meet people. So it's, by the way, an advice I give a lot of youngsters is don't have a job where the only relationship with a laptop. Get into a job where it's now, I think, very prescient given all that's happening in AI. So I think that certainly if you have a sort of, if you go out, meet people, you don't lose. There's so much in the world, you don't lose energy. I also try and keep myself occupied doing many other things apart from work. I read quite a lot. I am now quite interested in farming, bird watching. I play a lot of sport. Life is just a lot. So I spent, I don't know if that keeps me curious, but certainly it's a varied life.
Lovely. Looking back at your own early career, what belief or habit would you urge young professionals to develop early before ambition takes over?
Play for the team. I'd say, I like being purpose-led. One of the things I've seen, again, now kind of being at like you have kind of almost worked 30 years, you're kind of asking the question, people, and I look at success very differently from how other people look at it. It's not in terms of where you reach, but in terms of how you're spending the day and the kind of impact that you're making, right? And small or big is not the issue. The issue is impact. It's not about scale. I certainly find like people whom in this sense I call successful, not in terms of how much money they've made or what their position or designation is that they're certainly purpose driven. They certainly do something beyond themselves. Where you're not asking the question, how do I do to get my bonus? What do I do to get the next car? I mean, if that's not what's occupying you, then I feel like you certainly succeed.
Lovely. I'm going to ask you some generic lifestyle questions now. A business leader that you worked with, that you were really impressed by, and a business leader that you've not worked with, but are really impressed by.
Business leader I've worked with, I mean, two of them as well, who I've been most impressed with is actually Gopal Vittal from Airtel. He's a bit of a mentor, and some of these qualities of being purpose-driven, being self-effacing, what he's achieved in Airtel is monumental. If you look at the numbers, monumental. He's now the third largest company, but it's totally low-key and totally kind of driven by the cause, not by himself. So I would say Gopal Vittal, another boss in Levers called Sanjay Dubey, who also shared the same trait. A person I wish I had worked with, whom I've just had the opportunity to meet once, was R.K. Damani. I spent 2 hours with him like you. I didn't, unfortunately, formalize the interview because he's very media shy. But he's, again, a very inspirational person. He has some of these qualities, which is getting to the essence of the issue, kind of being very self-effacing. So he's someone whom I certainly admire a lot.
Is there a book that you'd like to recommend that we should read?
I've just read a book, 2 books I'd like to recommend. One is a book by this author called Vivek Shanbhag called Gachar Gochar, which a lot of universities in US now are reading. And my publisher, Chiki, told me that it's the best book to come out of India in the last 25 years.
Wow.
So I would say read Gachar Gochar. It's a profound book. I happened to meet Vivek Shanbhag and I asked him, what's the book you would recommend to me? Because his is a book that really made an impact on me. And he told me that there's a book by Leo Tolstoy called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which I read and it really shook me. And then I bought like 20 copies of it and I'm giving it to all and sundry. So the 2 books that I would recommend recently, I read a lot, but these are just the recent experiences, Gachar Gochar and The Death of Ivan Ilyich.
So Tolstoy, from a worldview perspective, life perspective, or a business perspective, that it profoundly impacted you?
From a worldview perspective.
Yeah, wow.
But the story of the death of Ivan Ilyich is business only because that guy is a judge in a small court in Russia. And he is worried about all the things we're worried about. Is his house getting painted? Is he moving to a better house? Where's the salary? Everything that we worry about. And then he suddenly discovers he's going to die. And then how his life pans out.
A sports person that you've learned a lot from, and why and how?
My uncle and my cousin are both tennis players. So my first cousin is Ramesh Krishnan and my uncle is Ramanathan Krishnan. Ramanathan Krishnan, again, is one of those really gifted people in many senses. His achievements are staggering. He came to the Wimbledon semi-finals twice. But his humility, and it goes back to maybe it's the same things I admire. When I'm a really bad tennis player, in fact, but whatever, since you're his nephew, all of us play, so I play 3-4 times a week. When I was a kid, he used to explain tennis to me, and he was so clear that, if you keep the racket at this angle and your leg is here, the ball will go there. So his explanation of tennis in terms of physics and the clarity that he had, and his son also, if Ramesh, sometimes even now I play with Ramesh tennis, he can hit 100 balls in a square feet. That's the kind of precision and clarity with which, and Ramesh was not, he could have done a lot better in tennis. So, but I would still say Ramanathan, he's written a lovely book as well called A Touch of Tennis, which both Ramesh and he have written together. But I would say Ramanathan Krishnan, having, being my uncle and close to him is...
I have some trivia to give you. When my dad was working in L&T in Shakespeare Sarani in Calcutta, I was a ball boy, India versus Czechoslovakia, and I was the net ball boy. And Ramesh played against Miloslav Mechir, who used to have a double-handed backhand on both sides.
Yeah.
And Ramesh was very, very gracious to all the ball boys.
Yeah.
And we used to have Lacoste t-shirts, and we were handed those t-shirts by Ramesh. And I also remember being an avid tennis fan that Ramesh had beaten Max Wilander once.
Yeah, in the Australian Open
second round. And and as a young kid, I was enraged when John McEnroe said his serve is so slow, I go to sleep by the time it comes, because he had such silken ground strokes. On both sides.
Read Open, which is another book. Agassi's book. He has a page on Ramesh and how he lost to Ramesh. And he says, it's a full page describing Ramesh's tennis. And he says, I lost to a better player. So...
and I believe his academy in Chennai is doing very well. I mean,
he's now winding that down.
He's winding that down.
He's also growing in age. So
wonderful. Talk about your music choice. What's in the car when you're driving, or, what's your playlist like?
I listen to a lot of music, but if you ask me my favorite music, it's Hindustani music.
Wow.
I learned, again, the story of my life is doing lots of things, but being good at nothing. So I learned the sitar for a long time. But you see, the thing about sitar is I learned again from a maestro. I learned from a maestro called Ustad Abdul Halim Jafar Khan, who, along with Ravi Shankar and Vilayat Khan, were the trinity of sitar players. But he didn't kind of, in that public sense, and there was success, he didn't publicly make it that big, though. I mean, he played with Dave Brubeck, and he's really, within the connoisseurs of music, he's very good. But the amount I learned from him, I learned lots of things except music from him. Which, but that as a consequence, if I have free time, I listen to Hindustani.
Your book, the preface, you dedicated to your grandfather and your father.
Yeah.
Obviously big influences in your life. And I find it's very witty what you say. I'd like you to tell the audience and the context of that.
No, I think my grandfather, certainly thought that I was, as he was right also. I mean, contrary to what a lot of people think, that they think I must have been academically very good and all, but I was a very, very slow starter academically. So my grandfather was kind of very pushy in terms of getting me to study and so on and so forth. And which was the opposite of my father, who was totally laissez-faire. And he didn't force anything on me all my life, except the one thing that he did was, there was a time in IMA when I was toying with management consulting, and he said, you cannot join management. He said, do what you want. I've never told you anything in life. But if there's one thing I want to tell you in life, you join Hindustan Lever. So that's why I dedicated the two people. My grandfather, who at least got me to pass exams, because I was in a situation where it's hard to pass. And my father, who was the opposite, who was laissez-faire, who in fact, there was a Davis Cup in 1984 or 85 in Bangalore, and it was during my exams. And my dad said, you don't write the exams.
Was it India, Sweden?
Yes.
Yeah.
And since I was Ramesh's cousin, I was sitting next to Edberg, who was the water carrier there. So Edberg and I were both sat in.
He hadn't made it yet.
I think Anders Jarrett and Wilander had made it, but Edberg was still the young guy in the team.
And Nystrom must have played doubles. Yeah.
Correct. So Edberg, so I had to kind of miss an exam. And he said, it doesn't matter, you're not going to get to watch. And he was right. There was no chance I'm going to get to watch sitting next to Edberg. Exams comes and exams go.
That's really lovely. My last question, is there concert that you went to, since I was telling you we are getting into concerts, like anything, Hindustani classical, Western that you went to, maybe not recently, maybe when you were an IMA, I don't know, that you came away saying, what a live gig, great performance.
Yeah, I mean, the concert that I remember the most was my Guruji. He played one morning in Gwalior, the Tansen Samaro.
Wow.
And he was very old by then. And I remember him saying at the beginning of the concert ki खंडहर से पता चल जाता है कि इमारत कितनी बुलंद थी.
Wow.
He was close to 90 when he said that. He played this rag called Bilawal, Shuddha Bilawal, which in Karnataka is called Shankarabharanam, but in Hindustani it's not played very often. And it was, I remember it was a beautiful concert.
So beautiful about ruins telling you what a building is truly. I cannot thank you enough for this. This has been so enlightening, and just like your book, full of life lessons. And obviously, it's even better meeting you in person than reading what you've written. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hrishi. Thank you so much. Pleasure. Thank you.
Keep your eye and ear out for more in the Knowledge series. Remarkable business leaders who shall be talking to me, and we hope you gain from it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.